Anybody remember what we're talking about today? Relationships, yes. Specifically, does anybody recall what specific relationship that we're going to be looking at? Marriages, that's right. So, oh, you know, marriages are, sometimes they're a challenge. I don't mean that in a discouraging way, but sometimes they are a challenge. And the reason being is because you've got two different people, two different minds that think differently, that process information differently, that communicate differently. And they are called to be one flesh. And yet, there is sometimes a gap of understanding. Marriages can be challenging, but they are absolutely worth every single challenge. Marriages that are done right are perhaps the closest thing to heaven on earth that we can get to. Because marriages done right are where that we are walking in covenant with our partner and in fulfillment of God's word. And God will bless that. Marriages that are done half-heartedly, well, those can be difficult, extremely difficult. And so we're going to look at marriages today and the dynamics of marriages. And we've got to make sure that we are understanding our spouse. We've got to make sure that we are trying to relate to our spouse. So, Genesis chapter 2, verse number 24. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Amen. You may be seated. Let me ask you, is there are there distinctive roles that are declared in that passage of Scripture? Let me ask you a slightly different way, trying to make sure that I'm asking the question in a clear way. Is there a responsibility that is defined, or at least declared? If the definition might not, depending on how that you want to look at it, and if you've done research into the root words and what the original meanings were and things like that, but just in reading that passage, is there a declaration of roles there? There is. Therefore shall a man, and it talks about leave his father and his mother, and it talks about cleaving. Anybody want to what is the definition of cleaving? What is that? What is it? To hang on, to hold on? Yes. It's to attach to. To his wife. Men, we have a God-given responsibility that we are to hold our spouses, our wives, in affection and help them to feel secure. That's part of the role of being a man or a husband, because and represents a maturing that transpires whenever a man leaves his father and his mother. It is him stepping out of his protective realm, where that mom and dad are going to take care of everything, and it's him stepping out of that protective realm, and then it's him cleaving to his wife. In a marriage, it is a man's responsibility to try to help to provide protection and to try to help to provide that feeling of safety by holding or being close to your spouse. God gives the definition of what marriage is. He declares it to be between one man and one woman. He gives the standard for what a marriage is supposed to look like. And the scripture is replete, by the way, with what a marriage should look like. And we'll talk about several of those passages today. But mankind is constantly trying to change and redefine what constitutes marriage. But God has not changed what the original concept of marriage was. It is not to be, it is not, marriage is not so that you can become socially acceptable. It's not so that you can pass down wealth more efficiently to your family members in a cleaner process. It's not for any of those things. It is for the purpose of the right family structure. God instituted marriage because he wanted people to be able to grow and to mature in a healthy family dynamic. There are people that grow up in homes that are, well, they're broken, and they struggle with those things. And all kinds of negative consequences, mental, health-wise, from an emotional standpoint, and also down to whenever they start their relationships. It can have such a dramatic effect on how that people conduct themselves in their day-to-day lives. I'll give you an example. I'll use me because, well, I know my story better than anybody else. Well, except for God. God knows it better than I do. But my parents got divorced whenever I was 12 years old. And whenever my parents got divorced, they separated. I honestly don't recall how many times, and it's not that it was like hundreds of times. It was several times, but they separated several times. I just don't recall how many, from the time that I was 7 years old until they actually divorced whenever I was 12. They separated and lived in separate households for I don't know how long. But whenever they got divorced, it had a significant impact on myself and my sister, both psychologically, relationally. My relationship with my dad was strained to the point that for, I believe, 2 or 3 years, I saw my dad 2 times. And it was something that was, it messed with how that I perceived my value and my worth. And this might, it might not make a whole lot of sense to you, but it makes perfect sense in my mind. But there came a point, not only from the emotional standpoint, but also just from the physical aspect and the financial aspect, which, by the way, marriage is never, we should never enter into marriage. And I know that we all understand this, but I'm still going to say it because I don't know who's going to watch this later on. We should never enter into marriage for financial arrangements, period. Just shouldn't do it. It must be because you love, and because not only love, but that you feel that God has said, yes, this is what you need to do. If you are doing for any other motives than that, you are putting yourself into a very challenging situation. We must enter into marriage understanding that it is a lifelong commitment. It's not a contract that we can dissolve at some time or some future time, or at least it's not how that we should go in viewing it. It should be gone. We should go into it with a lifelong commitment, determined that this is it. I am saying I do, and you are going to be the only person that I say and declare I do too. And it needs to be held with the utmost care and consideration whenever we do that. But from an emotional and a financial standpoint, after my parents divorced, it got to a point where that we were moving from house to house to house to house, and I went to 13 different high schools. I stopped unpacking my stuff. Doesn't sound like that big of a deal, right? Hold on. I stopped unpacking my stuff, and I lived out of a duffel bag for 3.5 years. I lived out of a duffel bag, and I refused to use anything other than what was in my duffel bag, because I was like, what is the point in me unpacking this stuff? I also did not seek out friends. By the time that we were on my 3rd high school, I stopped seeking out friends, because I was like, what's the point? In 2 years, I am not going to know anybody here, or I'm at my new school. I'm not going to know anybody there. So I stopped trying to do that. And so it had a large impact on me. I did not realize how much of an impact it had on me until whenever I was getting ready to get married. And I was having to, we went and we were looking at apartments to try to figure out, okay, where are we going to stay? Where are we going to live? And all of this. And we were looking at setups, and I was thinking, okay, got enough room. And my wife was like, of course, she wasn't my wife at that time. She was my fiance. She looked over at me and she was like, and she was kind of questioning, at least that's how I interpret it. She never actually asked anything, but she was just kind of looking at me while we were looking. And maybe it was just me reading into something. I don't know. But long story short, I began to realize that I wasn't taking and putting personal effects out to that point. And I had lived on my own for some time at that point. And I was still living out of a duffel bag. And I still had all of my stuff packed up. And it was very challenging for me to begin to unpack some of my stuff. But I had to force myself to begin to do that. And to this day, it is still somewhat of a challenge for me. If I'm being fully transparent, my wife, whenever we moved up here, she said, we are not going to let all of our stuff remain in boxes. And part of that was because she knew what kind of an effect it would have on me. Know and understand your spouse and what can impact them. Understand how to protect them. Understand how to help them, how to encourage them. Marriages are something that can strengthen our society if it's done right. What would you define as a good marriage? I'm sorry? God-centered. Good. That's good. That's good. Anybody else want to add anything else onto that? What was the question? The question is, what would you define as a good marriage? I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh that obvious. Brother Marshall. It's true. It's true. That's right. That's right. Anybody over here? You guys are quiet today. Compromise. Okay? That's good. And just to make sure that we all understand, I trust that we do, but just to make sure, can you give an example of that? That's true. That's true. That's yeah. Yeah. All right, good. Compromise. Compromise. What else? There's a Bible verse about that too, isn't there? Let not the sun go down on your wrath. Uh, there have been times that I've made the mistake as well, of not being able to finalize, or not finalize, but to be able to work through and bring resolution to a dispute. Let me ask you a question. Whenever there is conflict in marriage, how do you typically, and I'm not looking for an answer on this, but how do you typically respond to it? Now think about how that you typically respond to it. Now think about it from this perspective. Whenever there is conflict in a marriage, how would you prefer for your spouse to respond to it? Now there's probably the visualization that you might have had might have been two very different things. Maybe not. Maybe not. But understanding that, again, you're two different individuals, and that's okay. My wife, though I drive her crazy at times, she does not want me to think exactly like her. She wants me to do exactly what she wants me to do, but she doesn't truly want me to think exactly like her. Because if so, then I would be a clone of her, and that would be boring. Not that she's boring, but just we have our own unique characteristics and traits, and that's part of my wife's uniqueness, and her characteristics and her traits are part of what caused me to fall in love with her. And I don't want her to dull or to dim those things down at all, most of the time. No, I truly don't. But it's important for us to make sure that we are remembering that we are two different people. And whenever we approach our spouse, understanding how to approach our spouse and how that they relay information, it affects the outcome. Whenever you go into a conflict, are you going for blood or are you going for resolution? There's a difference there. And if you're going for blood, I'm going to tell you nobody's going to win. Nobody. You'll both be losers. But if you're going for resolution, it might be uncomfortable. It might hurt. But if you're going with the right motives and you're going with the right approach, then it will make all the difference in the world in how it ends. At the end of a conflict, I hope that my wife looks at me and says, "You're right." No. I hope that my wife looks at me and says, "Thank you for listening to me." We have differing views, and that's not wrong. But it comes back to that compromise that you talked about, and it comes back to how do we approach our spouses. Whenever you go to your employer and you're trying to make the case for why that you should get a raise or that you should be eligible for this promotion, you might invest the time and you might think about what am I going to say? How am I going to say it? In your delivery, you understand that part of it is the presentation itself and whether or not you might have an opportunity at this. Whenever you prepare for an interview, you're not only thinking about what possibly could they ask and trying to anticipate. By the way, one of my favorite interview questions that is unscripted, and I think it's so fun to ask, is if you could be any type of an insect or an animal, what would it be and why? And you get some really interesting answers sometimes. It helps you to, very side note, I'm sorry. But whenever you're preparing for an interview, you invest time and you give a lot of thought to your presentation. You give a lot of thought to being able to explain how you have come to the point that you're at now, correct? Most people, I've seen some, but most people don't just go into an interview and try to wing it. Why do we do that with our relationships? Whenever we are interacting with our spouse, we need to understand how to communicate with them. We do not need to wing it. We need to make sure that we have invested and that we have studied on how to effectively communicate with them and relate to them. Part of communication, by the way, what is communication? I'm sorry? Talking back and forth? Okay, that's part of it. Okay. Listening. That's it. It's as much listening as it is to be speaking, because communication means information processed both ways. It is impossible if only one side is doing all of the talking, or if both sides are trying to do all of the talking, but no one is giving room for active listening. It is impossible for it to be a completely resolved conflict, because things will be missed. Things will be missed, and it will not fully benefit. Marriage was defined by God for a man to leave his father and his mother, or his protective realm, that his covering, that he was protected, he was under the safety and of his family's household, and he was called to go out from that place and to cleave to his wife, where he is helping to provide and to protect for his wife, and that the two shall become one. Whenever we go into a conflict, if we are seeking to win an argument, we are seeking to harm. There is a story in the Bible about a man that was possessed with devils, that kept on throwing himself into a fire, and he would cut himself with rocks, and he was harming himself. And there are people in our society today that still do those types of things, and they bring self-infliction upon themselves. But I will tell you that in marriages, we are harming ourselves if we are going to try to win an argument. First off, we should try to de-escalate it from getting to the point of an argument. It can be a conflict, but an argument means that there is tension and walls up to where that we're just trying to lob grenades at one another. We need to try to de-escalate and be able to get to a point where that we can have a conversation openly about what our frustrations might be without getting into a defensive posture where that we're ready to strike back. Matthew chapter 19, verses 4 through 6. And he answered and said unto them, Have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and the two shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no longer twined, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let no man put asunder. Marriage is defined as male and female. One woman. They leave behind their respective families to come together to make their family. Now, it's not a total abandonment, but it's a stepping out to venture into life together. They become one flesh. They are no longer two separate and distinct individuals. They are one. Now, again, they've got two separate minds. They communicate differently. They hear things differently. They state things differently. And that's where the conflict can arise. But conflict in and of itself is not bad. Unresolved conflict is. Whenever we embark on marriage, we made a commitment where we stood in front of however many people might have been at your wedding ceremony. You stand in front of several friends, family members, clergy, or a justice of the peace, or something along those lines. And you stand in front of an individual and you take an oath. And you take an oath that you are going to do your best to will good. Anybody, what's the definition of love? Brother? Lay down your life for your friend. Good. Anybody else? Good. Good. Okay. We're going to move on from that one. Oh, anybody else? What would you say is the definition of love? Not saying that either one of those are wrong, because they're not. Well, yeah, yes, the latter was. His first one was good. First one was good. Second one, well, it is. That's a. I, I do, and that is. I like it. It yeah. Mm, mm, yeah. That's good. Really good point. That's good. That's very good. So let's talk about love in the way that we use it in our society for just a minute. I love tacos. No, I don't. I, I like tacos, but to love something, if it, it is it is something that is beyond just an intellectual response. It's beyond something that's just an appetite. It is an emotion, but it has to be deeper than just an emotional feeling, because feelings come and they go depending on how I quote unquote feel that day. Because if I wake up sick and vomiting or anything like that, then I might not feel well that day. So does that mean that there is a void of love because I'm not feeling well and therefore I can't feel that particular feeling? Love has to be an intentionally derived choice, just like what you were saying, where that we are purposeful, that you know what? It really doesn't just matter about how my emotions are, because my emotions might be running high or they might be running low, but I am going to consciously choose to, and so this is how that I would try to define love. While I agree with what the two original statements, not the third statement, but the two original statements, that those were both good. But if I were trying to define what love is, I would try to make it as a simple statement like this: to will good for someone else. I cannot love a taco because I am going to eat it. I'm not willing good for it. I enjoy tacos, but my children I love. I will good for them. My bride I love. I will good for her. And I would gladly lay down and take whatever was required in order to protect any one of them without a moment of hesitation, because I want the absolute best that God has in store for them. And so love is beyond just simply saying, "Aw, you're so cute. Oh, you're so handsome," and all of this and all of that, where it might start there between two individuals, but it has to grow to where that it's beyond physical and it's beyond emotional, to where that it is a literal joining together, where that you cannot be uncoupled. Because if you take a tree and you get two trees that are growing so close together that their root systems begin to work their way in and integrate their way into one another, and then those two trees began to wrap around each other or form together. If you took and tried to cut one of those out, the other tree is going to fall. Because it has learned to adapt life and the force of wind and balance in its life based upon the fact that it has that counterbalance or that other part that has become attached to it. When we enter into marriage, we are intentionally declaring, I cannot and will not go through this life without you by my side, so long as God gives us both breath. That is marriage. Love is where that we are intentionally demonstrating good towards that person that we care deeply about, regardless of how we feel. Now, marriage is a very tricky thing, because whenever you learn to rely on somebody, there's vulnerability there, isn't there? Someone knows about your insecurities. Someone knows about your biggest dreams. There are dreams that I've got that I don't share with many people. And it's not that I'm a secretive person. I truly am not. But there are some things I just don't talk to many other people about, because of the fact that I don't want someone to come and bash my dream over my head or mock it and cause me to lose hope in that dream. There is a lot of vulnerability whenever you become so close to someone that you are willing to share with them, and that you're willing to open up to them and say, this is what I hope to see happen, or this is where I come from. And as you begin to do that, trust begins to grow. But it's a very delicate situation, because during times of conflict, if we're going for vengeance, we can abuse the power that someone has given to us in sharing their deepest feelings or dreams or emotions, and we can push that back on them in a very negative way. That's the reason that arguments do not benefit marriage. Conflict will happen. It happens. There's just no avoiding it. But in marriage, open communication where we are willing to discuss and have dialogue, not where that someone is seeking to win, but where that we are seeking to understand. That is the power of marriage whenever it's working in the right way. Whenever you're young, what are reasons that you think that you want to get married? Anybody? I'm sorry? She's pretty. Okay? Anybody else? Sometimes it's because of attraction. Sometimes it's because of safety. Sometimes it's because of wanting companionship. And all of those things, there's nothing wrong with any one of those things. But that should not be the driving force behind why that we seek to get married. Why that we seek to get married should come from a place of, I recognize that God has placed us together, and I need you in my life. And not only that, but I also realize that God desires for me to be in your life. Now, some of you might not get this reference. I saw it whenever I was, probably 13 years old, ish. And there is this movie where there's this one line that this guy says, "You complete me." And I don't know if you've seen the movie or if you just think that's a cheesy line. I'm not sure, but there's this one particular line where it says, "You complete me." That is an unrealistic expectation. If we go in with that kind of a mindset, it's an unrealistic expectation on your spouse. Because I am not complete in my wife, and she's not complete in me. I am complete in him. I cannot be completed by another human being. However, God did call my wife and I to be together. But I do not need to cast the expectation for her to complete me, because that's not something that she can do. But in fulfilling God's will, we are called to be together. It's not a demotion. It's a making sure that you understand that and are properly aligning things. Because the things that only God can deal with us about and can help us with marriage, if we strive to understand, if we strive to understand our spouse. Has anybody in here heard of the escape room? It's like if you're not familiar with it, let me give you a 30-second description of it. It's where that multiple people, families, teammates, co-workers, things like that, where they'll go into an obstacle course, but it's an intellectual obstacle course where there are hidden clues and passages, and you try to figure out how to get out of these chambers of rooms that you're not in danger or anything, but it's meant to simulate some form of pressure as well. And so you've got a timer, and you've got it in order to beat the course, in order to win, you've got to get out by a certain number of minutes. I assume it's an hour, but I don't know for sure because I've never actually done one. But is it 60 minutes? Okay. Is it fun? Okay. Hey, maybe it's a men's thing that we could do. That might be fun. And so you're trying to figure out what the combination is. You're trying to find the clues. And yes, there is some measure of time that's there. It is our responsibility to figure out what the combination is to our spouse, to their heart, to their mind, not so that we can manipulate them, but so that we can understand them. It's got to be a pure motive, not where that we are trying to say, I've got you figured out, so now I know how to manipulate you. No, the moment that we do that is the moment that our marriage will begin to deteriorate in a rapid descent. We must take and we must guard with everything that is within us, because again, if we're taking what I articulated as the definition of love, and I'm not to will good for somebody, If we are willing good for our spouse, then we are not going to take and abuse the information that we have learned, and we're not going to manipulate it. We're not going to seek to harm them. We are going to protect them at all cost. The relationship of marriage is one that God put into place. It's a lifelong process because it's a lifelong commitment. People have a problem in our society of committing to something for 5 minutes, let alone 5 years, let alone 50 years. But marriage is meant to be a lifelong commitment. It's meant to be. Now, we could sit here and we could talk about, well, what if there's this situation? What if I'm talking about a healthy marriage where the two people are actively engaged in being intentional in benefiting their marriage. No matter where somebody is at as of yesterday, if they are married today, they can start right where they're at, and they can begin the process of having a happy and a very healthy marriage. But it starts with fostering trust and building and guarding with everything that is within us. We can't let our own mindsets I like the mountains. I love going to the mountains. It's my favorite place to go. It's so relaxing. It's pretty. It smells nice. I love log cabins. In fact, I begged my wife one time. I was like, let's just build a log cabin, please. I won't ask for anything else. She said no. It's okay. She told me, but she did tell me that maybe one day I could eventually buy a small log cabin to put on the back of our property. So I'm okay with that because I make that a wood shop or something. Because I love her more than I love the thought of having a log cabin. So we're gonna, priorities. We're gonna make sure that we're gonna set compromise. But I love going to the mountains. I really do. I hate going to the beach. Sand stresses me out. I don't like being around large numbers of people at all. And I just can't sand. It gets everywhere. It gets in your shoes. It gets in your socks. If you're walking around barefoot, it gets on your feet. It's just annoying, and you can't get rid of it. I don't like the beach. My wife loves the smell of the ocean. So that's not a bad idea. That's a good idea. That's a real good idea. And so now she might come next week, and she might be a little bit upset with you, but but taking and making an intentional effort and saying, you know what? Here's what I want to do. I want to take you and I want to go to the beach. Now, if I said that, it's not because I want to go. It's really not. But we do things for our spouses because it's something that they want, something that they enjoy. We do things for our spouses because we know it means something to them. And so making an intentional effort to do something for the one that you demonstrate the most human love towards. This might or might not be a popular mindset. Now, I love my kids. I love them, but I love them in a very different way. And I was called to marry my wife. I do not love my children above my wife. And God ordains marriage. We should put nothing but our relationship with God above that of our marriage. Not our job, not our finances, not our personal ambition, not our lifelong goal to become a world famous karaoke singer or whatever it might be. We are called to love. Now, next week, we will be wrapping up on our relationships. And I didn't get through even enough of this to be able to say that I can close this out. So it was still going to be dealing with marriages even next week, but I'll have to pick up a little bit of this week for next week as well, to be able to bring this to a more complete close. But next week, specifically what we're going to be looking at, we're going to be looking at the scriptures that talk about the responsibilities of a husband and the responsibilities of a wife, and how that we have effective relationships in marriage, because we do have responsibilities. We do have quote unquote chores, but it's not a chore or a task. It's something that we intentionally do in order to demonstrate love and affection towards the one that we care the most about. So with that being said, at this time, we're going to dismiss from Sunday school, and in about 15 minutes, we're going to have worship service. Lord bless you all. You all are dismissed in Jesus' name.